I guess it's my almost duty to bring you all back down to earth. Look at the slide. What's in the program is fake news. That's what I really want to talk about, the next world revolution. And if you think that's crazy, hopefully by the time I finish, you'll believe it. Because I think some of us realise that we are about to see probably the biggest revolution the world has ever seen. And I've got a subtitle to my talk, which is, will the world make space for Australia, or will Australia make its own space in the world? Now, let me set the scene. For 62 years, we've talked about Space 1.0, which is the space up there, and going to the moon, going to Mars and all that. I hate to tell you, that's not where the money is. The money is in Space 2.0, which is down here on Earth. And let me try and build on that. There's several slides I could have used here, but this was the simplest one. Just look at all the big companies in the world today. They're all recognisable. They are the biggest in the world. 10 years ago, only Microsoft would have made that list. If you think that's wild, go and look at the New York Stock Exchange from today to 10 years ago. I think in the top 10 companies on the New York Stock Exchange today, only one was there 10 years ago. And more dramatic, I think 5 of those from 10 years ago went back over 100 years. So we're seeing enormous changes in the last 10 years, and you're about to see a lot more. What Bill mentioned, the speaker just before me, he just touched on the fact that if you go back 10 or so years and look at every dollar spent in the world on space, less than 20% came from industry. Over 80% came from the various governments. You know, all the big players in that. I don't have to go through that. But in the last 10 years, that has flipped, and now it's over 80% of every dollar spent on space comes from commercial, not government. Let me tell you, the world has changed. And another reason I'm talking about a world revolution is it's not just in space. For the first time in human history, we are seeing a confluence of technologies the world's never seen before. For example, we got the space. We've been hearing about it all day. But we got a plethora of very smart sensors. And by the way, Susan is the chairman of the New South Wales Smart Sensing Board, so there's a message here for you, Susan. We're seeing some absolutely brilliant, small, very powerful smart sensors. We've got remote sensing, which most of you know about. Artificial intelligence is coming to the table in leaps and bounds. Robotics is coming to the table. Drones, the Internet of Things, applications, the cloud, big data. All of these technologies are coming together almost simultaneously. We've never seen anything like this ever. Now let me point to all of this. 5 years from today, there will be hundreds of thousands of small satellites in low Earth orbit. I'm going to repeat that. 5 years from today, there will be hundreds of thousands of small CubeSats, small sats, nanosats, They're modular. One module is 10 centimetres by 10 centimetres by 10 centimetre cubed, and they build them up in those modules. But think of something half the size of a loaf of bread. There's going to be hundreds of thousands in low Earth orbit. The only way I can describe that to you in terms that make sense is if you think about the revolution of smartphones. And it wasn't that long ago. I think the first real smartphone came into the world about the year 2007. Look how the smartphone revolution has changed our lives. What I'm talking about now is a smartphone revolution on steroids. Hundreds of thousands of these small satellites with really, really smart sensors needing very low power, apart from the NSSN, Susan, will be in orbit, low Earth orbit, which means high resolution. They're all going to be interconnected. There's going to be a mesh network of these satellites. They will communicate using light, not radio waves, because you can have much bigger bandwidth and there's no atmosphere to worry about. That is going to totally change the way we live. Elon Musk, who you've heard about today, let me tell you about Elon Musk. He is planning to launch, one person is planning to launch over 11,000 of these satellites in the next 12 months, one person. And only last week, he applied to the FCC in America, the Federal Communications Commission, to launch an extra 30,000. So we're up to nearly 42,000 in the next probably 2 to 3 years from one person. Everyone is getting into the act, including Australia, which is good. But let me give you some more point to that. Since the start of the space age 62 years ago, we humans have launched about 8,500 objects into orbit. 8,500. I just talked about one person who's going to launch over 5 times that in the next probably 3 years. Let me tell you, the world is changing. And I come back to where the money is. Let me give you another quick illustration. Apple, it's on the slide. Everyone thinks Apple makes their money out of selling smartphones. I hate to tell you they don't. Last year, Apple made $37.1 billion of profit from selling apps. When you have this mesh network of hundreds of thousands of small satellites in low Earth orbit, all with smart sensors, all communicating amongst themselves and downwards, that's really where all the money is, in that data. Now, the next slide, which has already been shown by the CSIRO, that's their latest synthetic aperture radars. Satellite, I think it's owned 10% by CSIRO and 90% by the UK government. But I actually had the privilege of flying the first synthetic aperture radar in space. And I cannot begin to tell you what these radars can see. They're super high resolution. Once we figured out, we couldn't figure out, it was an interesting story. Once we figured out, or got the data back, we couldn't even interpret it. Didn't make sense. It took us probably 2 years to make sense of it. Some pretty tough mathematics, which, by the way, is published in the Proceedings of the Royal Society back in England. But when we figured that out, With the synthetic aperture radar, was mentioned this morning, you don't worry about cloud cover, you don't worry about night, you don't worry about anything. It is easy, for example, not only to see a ship at sea, but to see the wake of that ship in a synthetic aperture radar. That's almost trivial. That will give you an idea how powerful it is. This one, as you can see, is Sydney Harbour, taken at night. You can see the Sydney Harbour Bridge, you can see the Opera House, etc. And that was, I think, within a week of it being launched, it can now do a lot better. So where am I going on all this? I'm going on how it's going to change the world and where the money is. And more importantly, how Australia and this state should be involved. Let me give you an example. 3 years from now, a farmer in Australia will get up for breakfast and he or she will sit at the breakfast table and download the data, 2 minutes, I've got to hurry, download the data from the day before using big data, algorithms, artificial intelligence, etc. He will be told what needs to be done on the farm that day, whether it's spraying, cropping, whatever. He or she will tap on their smartwatch only three years from now, and either a drone or a driverless tractor will actually go and execute based on that data from low Earth orbit in space. It's going to totally change agriculture. And if you really want to put a political spin on that, if we do that right, and also it's an energy problem, which I don't have to, I'll talk to you over drinks later. I've also figured out how to get huge amounts of energy from space. We can in fact be the breadbasket of Asia. That has huge political implications. So just to put more point to it, I'll go to the next slide and just look at the bottom. Why all this is possible is because the cost per pound per kilo to launch has gone down dramatically. It cost me a fortune, cost the US government a fortune sending me to space. They could probably do it with coffee money today. It has really come down, even to the extent, and don't get every country in the world is going to be launching satellites 3 years from now. And by the way, that's great and we should do it, but that's not where the money is. Already today, there is an Uber of space where you can dial up and say, I want to launch this sort of satellite and I'm in this time frame and this weight, and it's like a Trivago of space. You can do that today, no problem at all. So just to show you, I'll end up by showing you this, just to show you how easy it is. There's some small satellites that I'm talking about being launched from the International Space Station. You throw them out the window. It's really that simple. Thank you very much.